So which one are we looking at?
All right, so we're here looking at all the new rules updates. It's been a minute, so the dust is kind of settled. We just had a doubles tournament, so we kind of got to see a lot of it. Would you want to recap any spark notes of that?
For the doubles tournament, we being that it's doubles, there are some rules, air quotes, that we break in order to make it work. So two people team up, they're both playing 1,000 points. They have all the 1,000-point restrictions of 2 ofs or 4 ofs for battle line. But they team up together, they play together against another team, so they effectively play the game as if 2,000 points. So all the 2,000 points rules end up being implemented for the most part, with the exception of the 1,000 point list building restrictions.
Right.
We had a good variety of people as far as playstyles and factions and stuff like that. I think we were at, was it 16 people? Or was it more than that?
It was... We had 4 tables, so that's 8 teams. So 16
8
people.
8 times 2, 16. Nailed it.
Yeah, math. It works. Don't do math, kids.
So we had some horde players, we had some elitist tank players, we had some good mid-rangey stuff. So yeah, it was really good. And because it was doubles, there's the factions were pretty diverse, because while we had 16 players, even though we only had 8 teams, because we had 16 players, there was far more than 8 different factions that showed up.
Right. So which thing do you want to look at first? Here, we got the core rules.
Why don't we do the tournament pack? We were talking about the tournament.
Okay, here we go. Alrighty. So it's similar, but what's changed? Now, I've only kind of heard in passing. I'm at the game store almost the same times, all the time that you're there. So I've heard a lot, but I haven't actually dug in line by line yet.
So there's several things that you're going to see, and this early couple of pages is basically clarifications, things that they wasn't super clear before, but we kind of made a ruling and just decided a thing. So like placing objective markers, they clarified that you're like the little cards where it says it's like 10 inches from this edge. Well, they clarified that, it's like supposed to be to the center of the objective, so you're not wobbling 40 plus millimeters. They clarified kind of laying out some of the battlefield stuff. Most of this is arguably irrelevant. It's nice to have that information. I'm glad they made the updates, but it doesn't significantly change the way the game's played.
Okay, so for the objectives, for the 40 mil objective, the arrows go to the center of it now, not the edge of it? Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Because before, all the cards measured, and we'll see this later, they measured from the center, and people were, questioning, is that to the center of the objective? Is that to, like, the closest edge of that objective? Like, they're saying the gap is that big. We're talking about millimeters worth of difference. It's not a huge game-breaking change, but
it's clear.
Nobody really knew, so now it's clear, and that's better.
It just makes it clear. That's the whole point. I understand.
Yep, and I'm not necessarily, reading these exact paragraphs, but this is kind of the gist of what we get to.
So fixed and tactical stayed the same, it looks like?
So for the most part, obviously the cards themselves changed, so like what is fixed is different now. So there are some changes here, but for the most part, the mechanics of choosing fixed or tactical are effectively the same, with one exception. There was a kind of mid-edition rule thing change that was like never... It was like in a FAQ thing. The new orders is now not once per game. So that's a significant change.
Second discard, draw 1 new secondary card. So that's only for tactical, right?
Correct, but that used to be once per game. So if you drew bad once, you could only fix that once. Now it requires a bunch of CP, and it's still a stratagem, so you can only do it like once per turn. But it's a nice thing that, like, I drew bad turn 1, I'm going to use it early. Oh no, we're on turn 3 and I drew bad again. Let me fix that. It's definitely better. We'll see as we go down through some of the other stuff as far as the core rule changes that CP is a little tighter now than it used to be. So having access to this multiple times is really nice, but also doing it more than twice is going to be kind of difficult just because CP costs have kind of net gone up.
Yeah. It seems like, okay, most of this deploy armies, redeploy units, these seem the same.
Yes.
Determining victor.
And for the most part, all of these are.
Determining victors. The same.
So, slight change here. We now have secret missions now, which is a whole thing. But as far as determining victor, what's kind of important here is it used to be 45, 45, 10 for primary, secondary, and painted. Now it's 50, 40, 10. So they've kind of, again, a 5-point shift is not huge, but that 5-point shift going towards primary has kind of weighted that a little bit.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Also nice. With the secondaries, secondaries are objectively better now than it was when we had the previous thing. However, there's a serious drawback to them being better. Now, they hard cap your primary non-secret mission, if you choose that, at 20. So in the first 3 turns, you have to earn, or well, you don't have to, but you want to earn up to 20 points. You can only choose a secret mission if you're behind on primary points specifically. So you get into a weird area of, I want to max out that 20 points if I'm going to choose secret, but that 20-point max has to be under my opponent's primary.
Interesting.
And then you can select a secret mission.
Okay.
This is one of the things that we had several people kind of get confused on, because they're like, oh, this is how secret missions work, and the fact that you're only allowed to choose a secret mission if you have less primary, specifically, points than your opponent. Not points overall, just primary points. This can get a little confusing as people kind of get used to the new pack.
So you could be up on secondary, but
correct,
down on primary specifically, and do a secret mission still.
Yep.
Okay.
The other thing to note here is that it caps your primary at 20 if you select the secret, and then all of the secrets are worth 20 points. So you're effectively reducing your total primary cap to 40 instead of 50.
Because before,
so if you choose secret, you cannot.
Were the gambits throwing your primary away in exchange for the gambit before?
So sort of. Before, the gambits were 30 points, not 20, so you could still score max points, but there was it didn't cap how much primary you had already earned, and you could do it at any time. You could do it regardless of what your opponent had for points, is what I should say.
Okay.
But the big thing is that in arguably both cases, it caps your primary at whatever you had earned up to that point. So whether you gambit or secret mission, the thing you're thinking of is if you start the gambit, you say, I'm doing the gambit, you had to tell your opponent, and you stopped earning primary.
Gotcha. Okay.
So whatever you earned before that would potentially be tacked on. But the gambits were 30 points. That's way better, right? And the fact that it doesn't prevent you from getting max points, also better. But they were way harder to do. It was pretty difficult for the most part.
Okay, so secret missions sound like a way more playable gambit to me.
Correct. They're actually playable. People are seriously considering them. We had in some of our practice games as well as the tournament. I think there was one time where a secret mission was used. Like it's actually playable. It's actually good. It just becomes kind of a tricky thing to decide in the heat of the moment because, again, it reduces that cap from 100 points to 90 points. And then you can only select it if you have less primary. So, like, during the game, you can't just track points. You got to track primary separate from secondary. So it creates a little bit more bookkeeping and a little more, like, figuring out what is the right answer. But regardless of that, it's way more playable, way better.
Okay. So actions. How actions are certainly rearing their head this time.
Yes. So there's, again, as we get to later, we'll see that there's way more actions involved in the tournament pack than there used to be, which I think is actually pretty good. on board with that.
So restrictions have changed, right?
Correct. In addition, the number of times where a unit is allowed to do an action has changed significantly. So now, while it doesn't necessarily, it's not always true, but these bullet points are always somewhat true, but they kind of take priority over each other. Because again, there's always a stratagem or something like that, or a mission rule that will alter this. But overall, aircraft can't do actions. They kind of couldn't before, but whatever. That's because they were pretty unplayable for the most part. Battle shock units cannot do actions, which is arguably true from before, but there's some exceptions to that. Now OC0 cannot do actions, and we're going to go backwards immediately into battle shocked. If a unit is battle shocked but still has OC, like Dark Angels, they still wouldn't be able to do the action because they're battle shocked, even though they have OC.
Oh, okay, I understand.
So then you have units within engagement range cannot start an action, and one of the confusing things that we kind of had to talk about amongst the player group is that this all cares about starting the action. So you can start the action if you're unengaged. If they charge you, but the action doesn't complete until the end of their turn, the fact that you're engaged later is still okay. This is just the restrictions for starting the action.
Interesting.
And then there's an exception to the Titanic characters, which for the most part is geared towards Imperial Knights. A note for those who don't play Imperial Knights, the Little Knights, the Armigers and War Dogs, are not Titanic, even though there is a character version. So it's just the big Knights. And there's a couple of other exceptions to that, but anywho.
We can scooch on.
Yep, and then you can't do an action if you advanced or fall back. This is a big change because there was a lot of units that would have the assault keyword and would advance and still do an action. You can no longer do that.
Well, let's be clear. A weapon that's the assault type, not necessarily. Correct. It's a rule on their weapon loadout, not...
Right. And then you have not eligible to shoot this phase, which this seems like a catch-all for some other things, but the primary goal here is if it does one action, it's no longer able to shoot, which means it can't do a second action, is what they're really trying to say with this last bullet point.
Right. Okay, so if a unit starts for an action... Okay, whatever. Let's go
So
on.
This last paragraph is specifically to buff Imperial Knights. Basically, they're saying the big Knights can do an action and still shoot because they've got 8 models anyway.
Right.
And not all of their big Knights are characters, so this is even more restrictive than it kind of appears, but it's a nice little, hey, Knights, we know that you're in not the best spot, especially with all these new restrictions.
They're always trying to balance them. It's tough.
They're one of the most extreme factions as far as low model count and things like that. So it's hard to balance them compared to a lot of other factions. And also because they have so few data sheets, it's also much easier for the player base to point out how imbalanced it is. Whereas Space Marines, even if there is something imbalanced, which there always is, that's just how the game works.
They can be good and fun for
just harder to find
for newer players, in my opinion, because it's fewer models. You know, it's actually cheaper in the long run if you're trying to get 2,000 points because you're doing it in 500 point chunks. But the one thing that's funny is when your one Bigham weapon misses, it's almost like you're missing 200 or 300 points of your army. So
yeah, absolutely. And don't get me wrong, it's a lot of their weapons are really good stat lines, right? So even though it's only one shot, it's strength 20 and AP 5 and whatever else. So there's an argument to missing one die with them is 200 points. But also if you're playing a normal faction that has way lower strength and AP stats, there's a whole bunch of other dice that you're rolling that are also missing. So in theory, it's supposed to kind of average out. But it definitely feels as the player to be a giant swing when you have such few dice and few models.
Okay, anyway. So the Pariah Nexus mission deck cards errata. I don't know. Are all the cards on here?
Yes.
No.
So this is basically the whole deck, so that it's. Oh no, that's the other 4. Okay. All right. Well, they have a lot of the cards available, so you don't necessarily have to purchase the thing, but pretty much everyone does because it's just so much easier to,
Right.
shuffle up the cards and pull them out and stuff like that. There are apps for it as well. But these are specifically the changes that they made. I guess the actual deck is in a different spot. But yeah, you can see on here the biggest upside of this new deck is clearly formatting. So while it's still GW verbiage, so it gets a little confusing sometimes, the fact that they clearly indicate what is an action, they indicate, here's what battle round these specific parts apply in. They give you the bright pink bar of ore. Like, the formatting is so much better on this new mission deck. Even though we kind of gripe about, but what does this mean? And it's like we have to reread it 3 times.
Yeah.
I really hope they keep this formatting because the formatting is significantly better.
Right. It doesn't hit you like a wall of text.
Yes. Despite it being so sometimes, it's definitely better.
Okay. What?
So yeah, so these are specific erratas. I mean, we can go over them, but for the most part, it's just...
we can go on. So, let's see. We don't... Okay, so we can just talk generally about the decks. Oh, here, let's go over these. Probably we should talk about the fact that not all of these... Well, I don't know. Maybe we should bounce to the core rules update with the OC stuff and then come back to this.
We can do that. While we're here, they've got a thing in here about pivoting. We can go over that in the core rules. But if we keep going down, there's the new tournament mission pack.
Yeah, the terrain layouts and stuff.
Yes. So for the terrain layouts, they still have the caveat in there. Well, again, this is better, so they clarify some things. They're not saying you have to use this. They actively encourage you to, like, mix it up so that people can't predict exactly what it is you're going to do every time. But for those who don't want to think about it or don't have a good understanding of, like, what is balance, they have these in there so that you can just effectively exact copy. Beyond that, the thing that I do want to hit, though, is specifically the mission layouts. So all of your tournaments that you go to, this is what is recommended. They're like, you can mix it up, but they are strongly suggesting that you use these pre-laid out mission combinations.
Yeah, A through T.
Yep. And as much as that's true, I specifically went through all of these for our missions, and I kind of determined that I think there's about, I forget now, but I want to say it's like 6 of them that I think they shouldn't be played at tournaments because they're not actually that balanced. I mean, they're better than some others, but there's about 6 of them I don't like. And then there's about 3 of them that I think are kind of on, like, my alternate list for when we want to do fun stuff. It's not that they're imbalanced. It's just that certain types, like unexploded ordnance, that is the old football mission, but updated. It is way more balanced. It is actually has some balance at all. Like, it is playable now. There's nothing wrong with unexploded ordnance. But because it is reminiscent of the old football mission that everyone knew was unbalanced and kind of unfun.
What is the football mission called previously?
It was servo skulls or something like that.
Does it deploy servo
kind of
skulls?
like kick the ball forward.
Yeah, you like push pull the objective in the middle. Yeah.
And the previous mission pack, it was like a fun narrative mission, but also for tournaments, it was very imbalanced. Because basically, whoever went first basically kicked the ball and then was way better. Just the whole game.
Just always
probably win because it went first.
Right.
This is way more balanced. It involves actions to move the ball. It allows you to score points on both sides, even when it's sitting in the middle, because they did some changes to the deployment zones for some of the layouts, which we can talk about later. But no, this is actually playable and arguably balanced. I think this is totally fine. But again, for most tournament organizers, if that's who's listening, I would probably skip over this one just because even though it is fine, people are probably going to gripe at you, and I kind of have this on my alternate list of like 3 missions where it's like, if we want to do a fun narrative thing,
right,
but still in a tournament setting, I'll throw it in there where people don't mind so much.
Well, and so our doubles event was like a charity thing too, so it was a lot easier to be like, well, we can play around, you know, no one's really trying to get points to go to a bigger GT or something. It was just...
Yeah, and we ended up rolling on the table, so we didn't get this one. But yeah, it's something that's a charity event or something that's already kind of breaking the rules, like doubles. This seems way more reasonable to play because we're all there to have fun. We're not trying to like see who's the best, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's way better now.
So many terrain layouts. All right, pairings and rankings. Oh, they actually have... Wow, they're actually talking about wind path and stuff. Okay, well,
and they had some of this in the previous tournament pack. They've kind of beefed out some of the explanations here, so they've added a little bit to it. But for the most part, this is almost identical to what everybody was doing anyway.
Yeah, because BCP has been ahead on this for a long time.
Yes, and I will admit, I'm really glad they clarified some things here, because for those who use BCP but weren't really using the like automated stuff for BCP, I have seen some stuff on there where I'm like, how did this person possibly get third when they've lost twice, and this guy in fourth only lost once? So there's some weird stuff that I've seen on BCP, which isn't necessarily BCP's fault, obviously, but it's just some confusion as to, for those who aren't using the automated system, how did we get there?
Yeah.
This clarifies it for those people who aren't using any of the automated systems. But this is basically what almost every tournament organizer was doing anyway, without the clarification from them.
All right, you want to jump into the core rules updates?
Sure.
It seems like...
so there's going to be a lot here.
Yeah, this is where it's going to get thick.
So let me preface most of this. There are core rule changes that affect everybody. There are changes that they have marked in red that we have already been used to because they made the changes prior to this in like an FAQ and they've wrapped it in. So some of these are things that we already know. And then in addition to that, there's some changes that are in here that I would argue are effectively faction specific. Like while it is a core rule change, realistically at this point in time, there's only 1, maybe 2 factions that are affected by it. So while it is a core rule change, it is almost more of a faction-specific change than it is actually a core rule change.
Okay, so I want to make sure we don't miss anything, but we can go like thing by thing, and you can tell me whether it's a big deal and we need to talk about it or not.
Sure. Redeployments are one. So specifically, and this has to do... well, a lot of people are calling this a part of the new mission, but it's actually a core rule change. So redeployments used to happen after you figured out who went first. The big takeaway here, while there's a bunch of words, is basically if you are redeploying, and let's say you both have redeploys, whether it's you both do or one of you do, you would roll off, do your redeployments, and then do a additional roll off effectively to determine who goes first. So when you're redeploying, you don't know, am I going first, so I'm going to redeploy upwards and try to be more aggressive? You have to kind of make that decision of aggressive or defensive before you know for sure that you get to go first.
Right. And so that's the case now, right?
Correct. Yep. So that used to be all a part of the same thing. You determine who'd go first, and then the person who's going first had the choice to redeploy first. Same with like scout moves and stuff like that. But now redeploy is a separate step prior to determining who goes first, which I think is way more balanced and is also, as a player who does that thing, like also more risky, right? Because it's technically a nerf to me. Because if I don't know if I'm going first, I could redeploy the wrong direction.
Right.
But I think it is overall more balanced, and I'm glad that that's a step.
Okay, coherency, they're just saying, hey, don't mess around. You can only do things in coherency or they can't be set up.
Yes, pretty much. There was some weird cheeky stuff that people were doing before, but it's, for the most part, it was like super niche as far as whenever it showed up. So this is a thing that is basically unchanged. We could probably skip that.
Oh, here's some magic stuff. Out of phase rules.
This has actually always been a problem for them as far as clarifying rules across like many editions, because they, from their perspective, they say like as if in the shooting phase, like firing Overwatch, and that's the example they use here. Well, then you get, you know, a lot of competitive people or less knowledgeable people who aren't used to the competitive scene trying to get more competitive, who will start making arguments of like, it says as if shooting, so that means I can use this thing, my ability or stratagem or whatever else that says only in the shooting phase.
Yeah, my aura
basically the answer is no.
Yeah, my aura says in the shooting phase I get to reroll all hits.
Yep.
Well, is it the shooting phase or is it not? You know.
Right. Some of that stuff applies, like Oath of the Moment, things like that. But what is kind of the biggest takeaway here is, even though it says you are shooting as if in the shooting phase, you cannot use a shooting phase stratagem because you're not in the shooting phase. You're in the movement phase. Stop that.
Yeah.
There's obviously some abilities you can't use, like the other example they give down there is whirlwinds. So whirlwinds say if one of the things that you hit with its shooting in the shooting phase would get a debuff to it. Well, you don't get to do that because, yes, you hit them with a shooting attack, and you shot as if shooting phase. It's not actually shooting phase, so you don't get to debuff them on their turn.
Yeah, the pinning bombardment thing, that was a strat for a minute that people were using.
Yep. And this has showed up again in multiple editions. Almost every edition, they keep it simplified at the beginning, which then people, because it's simplified, they argue about it, and they end up expanding that explanation. This is not a new brick of text that they've added.
All right.
At least when it comes to multiple editions.
How about persisting effects?
This is more of a clarification than a change. So basically, there's been some argument in this edition about like, okay, so this unit is -1 to hit because they were, you know, shot with suppressors. Well, you killed the bodyguard unit, and there's this other rule that says when only the character's left alive, it now counts as a different unit for like, you know, killing total units or things like that.
Right.
So does the -1 still apply? This is just saying yes. If the whole unit was affected, even though it breaks out to be a separate unit later, it was a part of that unit. It still receives the debuff until the end of the phase, like normal, so on and so forth.
Yeah. Okay. Simple.
Yeah. Clarification.
Command points.
CP is also effectively a clarification.
1 CP per battle round. Okay.
No, yes, which is already how it was. All they're really doing here is like they're changing it to 1 CP instead of, I think it was more generic before. It was just like the CP that you gain during the command phase. Which,
well, so I thought the most you could technically gain is have a unit generate 1 somehow.
Yep.
1 for the command phase.
That's true.
Or for each player's command phase, rather.
Correct. So it's effectively 3 per battle round,
and then,
which is still true.
And then, like, if you discard a mission or whatever.
Nope. So that's another way to gain it, but that's still a part of the 3 you could gain.
Yeah, but now it's 1? You can't do that?
No. So what they're saying is the argument before, which is like the questions that they got, I assume, is so you're playing orcs, and during your command phase, you roll for the grots to see if you get an extra CP.
Right.
Well, the argument is it doesn't say that I gain 1 CP in the command phase. It says in addition to the CP that I gain in the command phase as a whole, I can only gain 1. So now I can gain 1 for my turn, 1 for the grots, and then discard a card later and get a 3rd, because the 1 that I gained from the grots was in the command phase. Now they're clarifying, no, when we say command phase, we mean the 1 you are automatically given. Your grots are a separate ability. It is not in the command phase, so it doesn't count against your cap of 1.
Yeah, it's not after the start of the command phase during the battle round, the way that they word it here.
Yes. So this is, again, basically a clarification. Most people were already playing this way. Very few people need to actually read this, other than the people that were trying to kind of like cheese the rule before and say, but I could gain multiple in the command phase and then one later. Yeah, this is just kind of toning them down a little bit. Most people this doesn't necessarily apply to, just because they weren't trying to push that rule.
Wow, okay. Okay, so Battle Shock doesn't double Battle Shock. That's...
Yep.
That seems simple. We can move on.
Mm-hmm.
Moving units.
Okay, so...
This is not the funky stuff in this paragraph.
No, this is basically just talking about, like, excess bits. So if you've got a Def Dread, or in this case they use a big Bloodthirster with the giant wings, basically they're saying if the base can fit, even if the wings can't, you can slide through. The base is what you're actually measuring for.
Oh, we got a nice... Yeah, here we go. There's a nice photo down here.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's only the base that he's standing on that matters.
Correct.
He can walk through the gap.
Is how most people were doing it before. We've seen, plenty of people that are like, this model's too tall because he has the standard, but we're going to put him on the second floor and say he's on the first because, like, he technically fits because that's what matters. It's just the frilly bits that don't.
Yeah.
This is just taking reasonable, nice play so that we all have fun with the game and clarifying it in the rules so that people stop arguing when they are losing.
Okay. Pivots and straight lines, models without a base. So we have a little Chaos Rhino here.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to start by caveating this whole thing and say that it's not actually accurate.
That's great.
That's my favorite part. So while this is all true and accurate, in the mission pack, the little blurb that they had basically expanded on this. So while here it says this applies to monsters and vehicles that don't have a round base. In the mission pack, they expand that to basically say models that don't have a round base. So basically things like bikes are now affected by this pivot rule.
Oh, okay, so these Terminators, they're not affected because they're on round bases? Their pivot value is 0?
Correct.
And monster and vehicles have a pivot value of 2 inches. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy... Oh, how does this work? I'm looking at image 5, moving without pivoting.
Yep, so you can drift is what they're showing you. You move forward 6, you can move another 6 because you got a 12-inch move, but you're going at an angle. Because you haven't rotated the model, you're drifting, but you're still going in a straight line without pivoting.
All right, so
you don't take the -2.
You're driving your Rhino in a crosswind. Got it. Okay. And then, so moving with a pivot value of 2. So you like go 6, then you go 4 a different direction, and then you turn for 2 inches after you get there.
Yes.
Can you turn all the way around? Is there a limit on the pivot itself?
No. And this is one of the gripes that I have, is that there is no limit to your pivot, right? So if you move any amount, it's 2 inches. If you move a bunch, still 2 inches. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that per se, but it's...
Well, I'm sure this is going to come up momentarily. Can't you swing yourself in to, like, make a charge?
So, yes, sort of. The thing that's a little unclear in their imagery is that basically you kind of have to declare that you're doing a pivot before you start moving, because that changes your maximum move.
Okay.
So while you're declaring that I'm doing a pivot, then you can pivot, and you've got like a monolith is a good example of, like, I deep strike 3 or 9 inches away, I declare a charge. Well, in that charge I declare a pivot that costs me 2 inches, I swing my big corner out, and now I'm 2 inches closer because I'm a big square.
Okay.
And now I can make my 7-inch charge or whatever.
Oh, and multiple pivots still only count as like 1 cost.
Correct.
Of pivot. All right, that's interesting.
And what that matters is for going around, like, buildings and things like that.
Moving overhanging models. with a pivot value of 2. Okay. All right. Yeah, because here's a charge right here, right? This Bloodthirster. I think it's a Bloodthirster.
It is.
Yeah, so this is a 6 and then a 4. Base. So he has 12 because he's paying 1 pivot, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I see how this is working. Sort of.
I don't necessarily have a problem with the rule itself, but there are some exceptions that I think make me not a fan of this. Obviously, this is the rules we have to deal with, and we're all going to be playing them. So, like, as much as I moan and groan sometimes, like, we're just going to do it. That's okay.
So this is the end of their, like, imagery examples. So what's below this? We just immediately go to firing deck and shooting phase and stuff. Okay.
Yep. So on the pivot, like I said, the biggest change here is that it doesn't talk about it in the core rules. It talks about it in the mission pack because it's apparently only for matched play, but whatever. We all do that.
Do you want to go back to the mission pack?
No, it's fine. But basically, they're just saying in the mission pack that it applies to everything that doesn't have a round base. So your bikes now get a 2-inch penalty. I don't love this because... like a monolith or a bloodthirster, when you rotate, you are actually gaining real inches because you have this giant oval base or your giant square. That's fair. I get the idea. When you start including things like bikes, you are gaining inches, but when you're gaining inches, it's like you're getting like half an inch at most, but it costs you 2 inches. So it's not ideal. Their implementation. It's again.
It would be valuable if the terrain was like, I mean, extremely dense. Like we're gonna drive down a curvy alleyway kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can't help but notice they had a Chaos Rhino for their example. But the Primaris grav tanks, they're all on round bases.
Yep, that's my second gripe. One of the things that they've clearly been creating a pattern in is that there's certain things that they're trying to nerf with points over the last year. And one of the things they've really kind of struggled with is the Primaris tanks, the Repulsor Executioner, things like that. They've been really kind of struggling to get those tanks in a balanced place where they want them. And that specific example is an exception to this rule. And it's specifically one, because it still measures to the hull, that is going to net gain a benefit here. Now, it's not a melee-oriented unit per se, so, like, is cheesing out an extra charge that big of a deal? No, maybe not. But also, as we'll get to later, because they changed the way Tank Shock works, Tank Shock is stronger now than it used to be. So it actively is a real benefit to those guys, making them harder to balance, because they got a better tank shock, and now it's easier for them to charge than every other vehicle after we just nerfed not only every other vehicle, but every other non-round base model. It's kind of crazy.
Gotcha. Okay.
And there's some other poor examples of this as well, like Orc mech guns. It turns out they're a vehicle, and they're not on a round base, and they have a 3-inch move. So if you turn or pivot in any way, you get like a 1-inch move.
All right. Yeah. Okay.
So you're not moving if you pivot at all.
That's kind of awful, but
yes.
So firing deck is not that different.
Nope, not for the most part. Though they have
they've caveated with a special rule for some weapons called one shot. Basically say, no, you can't use it for firing deck.
Correct, because basically the argument before was all the weapons that the unit inside had could be shot from the vehicle with the one-shot rule because they owned it, and the vehicle was the one that shot it, so it didn't do the once per game limitation because the actual unit hadn't shot it.
Right. Yeah. I understand. The shooting phase, that's pretty straightforward. As another target. What?
I'm going to take you back one sec while you're reading that. Firing deck also has a kind of significant change specifically for units that could move during the shooting phase. There used to be a kind of combo of shoot a unit, it moves after it shoots, embark in a vehicle, and then fire those weapons a second time using firing deck. Now it says units who have not already shot.
I see. So
they've prevented that combo.
They're avoiding the exploit there, which is obviously not intended. It doesn't make sense logically.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so unless at least one model in a unit has an eligible target for one or more of its ranged weapons, that model's unit can't be selected to shoot. So they're saying if not even one guy can see the target to shoot at it, then obviously the unit can't shoot at it. Why did this need to be clarified?
Specifically because their example is gargoyles, but there are several units that could move after they shoot. So the argument that people were trying to make before is I declare my shooting. There's nothing in ranged, so I don't roll any dice. But I declared that I shot, so now I get my move after I shoot in order to shuffle myself onto the objective or whatever else.
Okay. So they're just to cheese some movement effect from the action of shooting. I understand.
Yes, for the most part. There may be some other things, but that's the easiest example. Yeah, it's just to prevent you from kind of cheesing out an ability off shooting.
There's a lot of text about mortal wounds here. What matters?
So the only thing that really matters is that they changed how devastating wounds and hazardous works. Hazardous is really a niche situation, so we're going to skip that for now. Devastating wounds are now mortal wounds, except for they don't spill over. So custodes, etc., everything that gets a feel no pain against mortal wounds now gets it against devastating wounds, like they have in the past. But now it's clarified in the rules that all dev wounds are now mortal wounds. Again, the big caveat, though, is that mortal wounds by themselves normally spill over from model to model. Dev wounds do not.
Yeah, so a good grenade is just mortal wounds. But if you have a devastating wounds shooting...
Yep, like on a Thunderhammer or something like that, even if they're one wound models, you will overkill the model with a dev wound instead of killing like 3 different models.
Yeah, your hammer can't hit 2 guns at the same time, I guess.
Correct. Yep, this is clearly how it was always intended. I think it's worded poorly. Who would have thought the GW worded things poorly? I think they could have just basically errated a couple of abilities, because there's like only a handful of abilities in the game right now, and they could have just gave the feel no pains to dev wounds in addition to mortal wounds, and we wouldn't have needed this. But they decided to change it in the core rules instead of on data sheets.
Hazardous also doesn't overflow? Is that what I'm to gather here?
Correct. So hazardous doesn't overflow. Before, hazardous was if a model failed hazardous, the model died. Unless it was a vehicle or character.
Yeah, killicans.
Then it would take 3 mortal wounds. Well, now everything takes 3 mortal wounds, which means even your regular model that's not a character or vehicle, if it does hazardous but has feel no pain, it could feel no pain away the hazardous. Technically better.
Yeah, but so it's still the same though, where like the killicans get weird on a model by model basis.
Yes, they've also changed how the hazardous keyword is worded. Well, it's not here, and we'll probably get to it later. Basically, hazardous now, you're not rolling by model. You're rolling X number of hazardous for the unit. So you don't have to split up like, oh, my character rolled hazardous on its plasma pistol, it takes the damage, and then my regular guy didn't. It doesn't work that way anymore. Now it's just like a normal kind of attack coming at you, so it has to go on the battle or the bodyguard first, and then you'll eventually get to the character, In the case of Killicans, once one model starts taking hazardous damage, they would keep taking hazardous damage till they're dead before it moves on to the next guy. Yeah.
It looks like there's a light nerf to indirect fire.
There is a nerf to indirect fire, and the argument is it's not light. If you don't take into account outside factors, the answer is always missing on an unmodified 1 through 3, so you're only hitting on 4-ups when using indirect fire, is a really minor nerf. When you start taking into account outside factors like guard orders and other abilities that are giving you +1 to hit and things like that, there was a lot of indirect fire that was hitting on 2s and 3s consistently, like in guard and even some Space Marine stuff. So this is actually a pretty big nerf.
Because no matter your buffs, you can't get better than a 4-up, basically.
Correct. But all the debuffs still apply. So I can only ever hit on 4+, but if they have stealth and I'm indirect firing, now it's 5-ups. And that's in addition to the subtracting 1 that still exists to the to-hit roll. So if I hit on 3s because I'm a Space Marine and I indirect fire, I'm hitting on 4s because the -1 from indirect. Then they have stealth. It's another -1. The modifier shouldn't stack, but the +1 to hit I'm getting from this other ability is negated, and like, yeah, so it's a bigger nerf than it appears, but the short answer is it's indirect fire was getting upped in points a lot anyway. So when it comes to actual list building, I don't know that there's a lot of change here.
Gotcha. Okay, so
it could be.
In it caveats if no models in target unit are visible to the attacking unit or whatever. But if they were, then technically it's like direct lobbing at range, like because you can see them.
Sure, but yeah, that's just how indirect fire works. If you can see the enemy target, then
it's not indirect fire.
Firing, and none of this applies.
Okay, we can move on. Hazardous. Here you go. Here's the section.
Basically, all the stuff I said before. It always goes on the bodyguard first, effectively. When you're taking it hazardous test, you're basically rolling for the unit now, for the number of hazardous weapons that you fired.
Okay. Extra attacks. Huh.
So this is them going backwards because they messed up. Basically, extra attacks were kind of supposed to be unmodifiable because they were supposed to be this extra thing that like wasn't actually the model fighting. It was like their little servo skull that was shooting a laser, or their helmet that had lasers attached to it, that sort of thing. But they put in several abilities in the game into various data sheets that allowed you to specifically interact with extra attacks. And this core rule kind of prevented the unit from having an ability at all.
Right.
So this basically just cleans some of that up so that those abilities now can apply.
It looks like they hard capped or limited modifiers on things. Ooh, did they change saves? Oh, your save can be terrible. Okay. That doesn't change my 7-up routes. That's fine. Controlling player can choose for the unit to be...
Yep, almost all of this is stuff that is fairly obvious. Like,
leader is the same.
Always fail.
Insane bravery is cheaper? Wasn't it 2 CP before?
Yes. So specifically insane, or no, sorry. Insane bravery isn't cheaper. That's the auto pass thing. Some of this was already implemented. So this now says that you have to do it before you take the battle shock test, because when the edition first came out, you could do this after you failed the test.
Yeah, so you could kind of
already had that change in the past.
Yeah. It's just in here now.
Yep, and they also added the once per battle restriction. Again, we've already been dealing with that. That's not any different, but now it's officially in the rules is basically all that's happening.
Yeah, grenade changed.
Yep. So it excludes advancing and falling back units. So before you could kind of like fall back and say like, well, I didn't shoot, so I'll grenade you as I fall back. Now you can't do that. Same for advancing.
Command reroll, it seems, well, they put red text here. It seems mostly the same. You can again, command reroll desperate escape, which is kind of interesting.
That was there before. Basically, nothing here has really changed. There is a change, but the change we've already had in the past. So as far as we're concerned, there's no real change here. This is just them going from, hey, we had an FAQ where we made a change. Now it's actually in the core rules because we decided we wanted to keep it. Tank shock is an important change. It no longer uses the strength of a weapon and now uses the vehicle's toughness.
I think that makes sense.
It's more logical, as well as on 75% of the vehicles in the game, that's a buff. Some vehicles, like the crazy ones, like Imperial Knights and Gorkanauts and things like that, they had a crazy strength weapon, so they're getting a debuff here. Instead of rolling like strength 20 dice, you're rolling like toughness 12.
It was always capped at 6 though, so it was just more likely to get 6.
Correct. And the fact that most vehicles in the game are not meant for combat, so most vehicles are running like strength 5 or 6 weapons, but they were toughness like 11 or 12, they are getting a direct and clear buff. This is better for most vehicles.
Oh, rapid ingress.
This is a really minor clarification. I don't know if there's much to go over here, but basically you couldn't put a single character with Deep Strike into a unit and then say that it had Deep Strike.
Heroic Intervention didn't change, except for it got cheaper.
Correct. That's the one. It got 1 cheaper. This is one of my favorite changes. And it's not just because I play an Assault Army, but it's specifically the fact that it has a giant restriction of you don't gain the benefits of fighting first when you do this. At 2 CP, it felt like all I was doing was giving my opponents more targets. Now at 1 CP, it seems way more reasonable because like spending 2 CP and then, yeah, I'm only 6 inches away, but I rolled like a 4. Oh, I don't make the charge. Spending 2 CP for you don't even know if you make it to combat, and then they get to fight first still and deal with the thing that you came in with.
Right.
That was a pretty hefty cost. Now that it's 1 CP, still has a lot of restrictions. It's still very situational as to, is the thing that I'm bringing in actually tough enough to live until it gets to swing? I don't know. But at 1 CP, it's at least a choice now, it feels like. Much better.
Okay.
Fire Overwatch. We've already had this change, but enemies now have to be visible in order to fire Overwatch at them, so you can't indirect fire them. That's a change they made in the past with the FAQ.
Yeah, okay, ruins, it's whatever. What? Is Belisarius call his own unit type?
Correct. Same with all the Primarchs. So the Primarchs all have the Primarch keyword, which is a unique type to them. And then Call is effectively a Primarch, so he's not a monster, he's not infantry, he's just himself.
He's a spider leg robot thing.
Yes. So he is his own type, but
it doesn't seem like it matters.
There's a couple of others. Yeah. Basically, they're saying he's Primarch without being a Primarch.
Ruins,
so that's
visibility.
Kind of what his model was intended as.
Yeah, you can see aircraft from wherever. Not that they needed to, whatever.
Yep.
There's a bunch of FAQs.
And some of this, yeah, because like with towering and stuff like that, that's already a thing we've been dealing with. They've just implemented it into the main rules. So again, it doesn't really apply. It's not a change.
Okay, so there's not too much after this other than some commentary, which I mean, that's what we're doing anyway.
Yeah, there's a bunch of FAQs, but half of them are kind of obvious answers if you like really read the rules. The other half are like weird niche situations.
Big guns never tire. You want to settle this fucking thing? I'm like down on the page with the example picture.
Okay, so I'm going to give it a specific example that's not here because it is kind of the real situation problem that we have. So big guns never tire. While a vehicle or monster is engaged, it can shoot or be shot at, but at a -1.
Simple.
That being said, it has an additional restriction of blast weapons cannot be shot into combat unless it has a special rule. So the blast weapons can still be shot even though it's engaged, but it has to be at something not in engagement because it doesn't want to blow itself up. All the other weapons can be shot either in engagement or at another unit outside the engagement.
That's basically it, right?
That's basically it. The issue that is currently has people talking about this, and the reason you're like, it's a whole thing, is because in our shop we have several Tyranid players. Well, with the new data slate changes, Tyranids have access to take a non-monster unit and put a monster character into it. So now the unit is both a monster and not a monster at the same time. The way this rule is worded, the unit has big guns never tire because there's a monster keyword in the unit. However, the -1 to hit, for some reason, because we only rate the clearest of rules, the -1 to hit only applies to the monster because it's a separate line of text where it says the monster or vehicle receives -1 to hit. So the rest of the unit gets to fire as if big guns never tire, but doesn't get the -1 to hit because they're not actually a monster. And it creates some confusion.
Yes, that's very confusing. They get the benefit of the keyword,
model,
but not and the keyword, but not the
penalty. Yes, because it's monster unit receives the big guns never tire, but it's monster model that receives the penalty.
Okay, well, I'm just gonna move. I think we're done with this one. This has obviously extensive FAQ in here. I'm just gonna.
Yep. I'm just gonna skim through real quick. I don't think there's too much else. There's a bunch of little clarifications.
You want to just jump to the balance data slate real quick because that'll be pretty quick.
Sure.
And that's probably all we'll do. So
yeah,
these are
some other stuff in here, but I don't think it's too much.
The balance data slate is like the faction specific. Well, there's some general stuff about stratagems in here, but it's also about specific factions getting updates to like some of their
and specific
rules.
Abilities. Yeah. So the general stuff is probably the most important because that applies to most people.
Yeah. You can't bring things back more than once. That's a fun one.
Yes. With the stratagem, but that's again, this is all specifically stratagem. So gene stealer cults can still do it many times over.
Yeah, stratagems can be. There are some that can be used more than once per phase or turn. They have clarifications for that.
Correct. So the biggest thing here is going to be the CP changes. So now both reducing CP from like Captain Chapter Master abilities is now reduced the cost by 1. It is no longer free. In addition to that, the increase from Vect is now usable more often, but it's only a 12-inch aura, so it's no longer my opponent uses a stratagem, I just tell them it's 1 more for the rest of the game. Now it's specific by is the thing they're targeting within 12 inches of the thing that has the Vect ability.
Right.
So when it comes to CP, like things are going to cost more often, and they're going to be more varied. It's like both of these abilities are no longer restricted to the battle stratagem. So now you can hit anything with them. much better. But the fact that it's not free and it's not a single thing gets more expensive, so you can just avoid that stratagem in the rest of the game. It could be many things. It's net, the game is costing more CP.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's see. I'm going to go down to the factions here.
Sure. While you're doing that, I'm going to say there's another big change that we've kind of missed, and that's the stratagems that give lone operative. They now give bad lone op. So instead of being actual lone op that was 12 inches, any stratagem that gives that ability is now 18 inches instead of 12.
Which is pretty big, like in size.
Right. For the most part, that stops like backline units from shooting at you, but by the time you wanted to give it lone op, half of their army that wanted to shoot at that unit because of terrain is probably already in range of that. It's just going to be a few long-range units that the stratagems are going to be useful for. Regular lone op is still 12 inches and still crazy good, right? But yeah, the stratagems got nerfed really hard, though you probably won't see those very often.
Okay, so nothing changed for sisters.
So both sisters and custodes, while it's not here, they got the significant change of certain detachments for them will have feel no pain against dev wounds now. So they did net get a buff here, but it's not data sheet specific. It's more core rule change.
AdMech got... They're still trying to fix it.
Yep. It's
By a lot.
A little rough for them. That's...
Clearly their attacks were too small, so they buffed the attacks of several things and the damage of several things.
And while we're not looking at it right here, they also got a lot of points changes. So the answer is they have more models and they have more dice. They're the Imperium's Horde now. I think even more significantly than Guard, because Guard got like cheaper tanks and stuff like that. So I think they are the new Imperial Horde, at least for now.
For now, they're trying. Eldari are in a place. Fate roll 6 dice.
Most of the changes here are arguably pretty minor. The one that I want to call out is the Night Spinner. I'm super glad that they made this change finally. There's a whole bunch of things in the game that reduce movement if you shoot at them. Night Spinner was clearly different than everyone else in the game who had almost identical rules, to where it would prevent you from advancing at all. And now here, they're just saying you can still advance, you're just slowed down. It's like everybody else.
Right. They're making it less crazy.
Correct. I'm super happy about that one. There's some other changes here. Some of these were already changes from the previous FAQs, but
how about Guard?
Fairly minor stuff.
Guard have changed a bit.
Yes. Again, biggest change to Guard is the detachment rule. So they used to only get lethal hits when they stood still. Now they get lethal hits all the time, but only for certain keywords. So way better.
Yeah, the squadron.
Yep. So basically, most of their vehicles, not all, most of them get lethal hits all the time now. Most of their non-vehicle, monster units get lethals all the time now. So the detachment is way better. Because that is so much better, arguably, they also got a nerf to their orders, the voice of command. So it was a short period of time where they adjusted the orders rules to give more orders. And when they did that, they worded it poorly so that you could cheese out a unit that's only supposed to give one order could give an order and then disembark later and then give another order. So that was kind of unintended because they had poor wording on the last FAQ where they changed this. So they're kind of reverting it back. So while it is technically a debuff, it is still better than it was when the edition started. So we can't complain about it too much. Just like the Custodes and Sisters, one of the big changes to Guard is actually a core rule change because they have more indirect fire access than any other faction. The fact that indirect fire got nerfed They also received a nerf in addition to the giant buff that was their detachment change.
Oh yeah, Blood Angels got a Red Thirst detachment rule here.
Yep, this is already changed that we had in the previous FAQ. They're
adding
kind of making more solidified.
They're adding 2 to strength and 1 to attacks. I guess they didn't want to do the +1 to wound thing anymore.
Yeah,
from back in the day. All right, Chaos
they still have access to it, but they just didn't want it to stacks that you're getting +2 to wound.
Right,
I think is what
that makes sense.
The goal was here. Chaos Knights basically are getting some changes to make them a little better. They're getting some more mobility so that they're less restricted due to short buildings, things like that.
Okay. Chaos Space Marines.
Chaos Space Marines, it's super minor. The Warp Talon's got a nerf here, so they have to actually kill something before they get to do their sweet ability. That being said,
cool.
As you go to the points changes, you'll also see they got a decently big nerf, and they got a lot of points ups.
Yeah, Chaos Demons. Let's see. Oh. So a lot of the big bads of Chaos Demons just have Shadow of Chaos.
Which this is
at 6
arguably
inches.
All a buff. Like, there are some stuff in here that you could argue isn't necessarily a direct buff, but there's a fair amount of this is better for them overall.
Yeah, this is just all Shadow is bigger, is more better, more betterer.
Correct. Dark Angels, they're clarifying some things here, but for the most part, it kind of, I don't know that I'm super bothered either way. The biggest change to them is they're going to be more action inefficient now because of that. When you're battle shocked, even though you still have OC, you can't do actions anymore. But Dark Angels was fine to begin with, so it's not that big a deal.
Yeah, they updated the sweep. Attack. Well, whatever. Death Guard don't seem so different.
Nope. It's not a big change. They're just kind of clarifying characteristics and
yeah, that's not much.
The ones for battle round thing, like it's not too bad.
Death Watch had to clarify what bolt weapons are again.
Yes.
So many things.
But see, and that's part of the thing, right? Like you say again, but this is arguably the thing that they did in the previous FAQ.
Yeah. I remember these.
Here.
The Drukhari, the Duck Boys, melee type, something about AP, power from pain, whatever.
Yep. Going back real quick, Death Watch, just as a reminder, they actually got a really big buff here. So while we say that all these changes are effectively nothing, because we're already used to those, their Vect ability, because they have them on the Watchmasters, they actually got a giant buff this change.
Gotcha. Gene Stealer cults, nothing. Grey Knights.
Gene Stealer cults, again, buff arguably, because the whole game said you can't bring units back more than once per game.
Yeah, but they have it not through stratagems, right?
Yeah. So they actually got a buff by not changing.
Yeah, they got to stay unique while everyone got less unique.
Yeah, toned down.
Reroll. Yeah, some reroll stuff for the Knights. It's not too crazy. Kind of similar. The movements got cleared up just like the Chaos Knights. Okay.
League of Votann stuff is basically stuff that they already did in the previous thing. There's not much here as far as changes. I was really hoping we would see a nerf to these guys, and just that like strike force goes down to 3 units instead of 4, but
yeah, it's...
What do I know?
We got Necronis. Not much. They exclude monster units arriving from Deep Strike. For cosmic precision. Okay.
Yeah, it's not that big a deal because it's on like one specific stratagem for one specific detachment. That detachment is really good right now, so like fair. I'm glad it happened, but also it's not that big a deal.
Is this a buff to the invul on boys? Weird. So I thought it was 20 or more for the 5-up invul. Interesting. Okay.
These are all, I think,
these are all straightforward. Yeah, I don't think we got to go over all these. Here's
debuff.
Yeah, they got
that
debuffed.
One's actually important.
It went from a Feel No Pain 4-up to 5-up.
Yes, which is significant, especially for the Bully Boys detachment, where they were effectively wawing for 2 battle rounds in a row at the beginning of the game.
Oh, I still think they're really good. Period.
But they are really good. But they went from kind of you couldn't touch them at all for 2 battle rounds to, okay,
now they're good.
I still don't want to shoot at them, but if they're my problem, I could focus half my army on them and actually do something
right
more reasonable.
Okay, Space Werves. You want to talk about your sad dog boys?
We should hit Space Marines first. Iron Storm detachment. Basically, all of their enhancements turned into auras, or at least the significant ones they were using. That's a giant debuff. I think they're still playable because they're good, right? And especially with the new pivot thing, like they're arguably gaining mobility while everyone else is losing it. But that being said, this is like the 4th iteration of them trying to figure out how to balance Iron Storm and repulsor tanks.
People still seem excited about it.
Yeah.
Like the Space Marine players are still jazzed about it.
Going on to Space Wolves, our detachment, the fluffiest detachment in the game, is better. Sort of. So now we just get one of our sagas at the beginning of the game because we just decided. That's pretty good. However, we can't choose the one that everyone would actually want to choose because they saw us coming. So you can choose any saga other than Majesty to just get at the beginning of the game. And then all of the sagas got a minor change where you can score them at the end of a turn instead of the end of your turn. Giant buff as well. Does that make this detachment playable over some of the others? I'm still not convinced, but it is way closer to playable than it was before, so fair. Still in the right direction.
Yeah. Oh, Thousand Suns. I don't know. I mean, we have a guy in the store who plays them, but I haven't seen him put them on the table in a minute.
Yep, and this is all directly effectively a buff. They did make some debuffs here as far as how some of their Cabal stuff works, but they kind of traded that out for some good changes when it comes to points and stuff like that. This is all pretty reasonable stuff from what I've gathered. I don't think it's, a net debuff or buff. I think it's just kind of trying to find a different balance. So you spam some other units than you were spamming before, but it's still good.
Yeah, how about Tyranids?
So Tyranids, super buffed. They were already kind of doing well. They weren't like the best by any means, but they were still keeping up with some of the competitive armies. And then they got a bunch of buffs. So the thing that I was complaining about since their codex came out is they have a bunch of detachments that go off specific keywords. Well, they had a bunch of units with those keywords, and by a bunch, I mean like 2 or 3. It was like, oh, this detachment looks really good. And then when you actually look up the keywords, it was like, but there's almost nothing I want to target with these stratagems. So they added a bunch of keywords to various different units so that those detachments actually have more valid targets. This is how it should have been from the get-go. Way better. The thing that wasn't as obvious is they changed how Synapse works. So in addition to the little leadership buff, they also, every unit in Synapse gets +1 to their melee weapon strength. So they got a buff in melee, which is really good. They already had a bunch of monsters, and this buff to strength is less impressive to the monsters, but is nice to have. Where this actually becomes kind of important is if you wanted to play some non-monster stuff, which most of the competitive lists were kind of shying away from. This now makes it to where your Gaunts actually can fight with some Space Marines. Like, Space Marines still have good armor, and you still have low AP, but the fact that you're not also wounding on 5s for no reason, you're wounding on 4s now, makes it way more reasonable to play some of these non-monster units and still compete with some of the things that you're going up against.
All right. World Eaters? You got any notes? It seems pretty much the same.
The big difference, I think, is actually the bottom one, where they changed the Demon Prince's Invul aura. Yeah,
you can still buff an Invul up to 4 now. If they already have an Invul, instead of doing nothing.
So I think that's significant. As far as Berserker Glaive, that's actually a change that's already happened, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it was kind of OP, and they kind of undid it.
Yep. The Corn's Favor enhancement got changed to once per battle or once per game, instead of the once per turn, which was basically every turn.
Yeah.
So there's a nerf there. There's a buff.
Okay, let's touch on points real quick. Points. Also known as the Mutatorium Field Manual. Okay. Sisters. Stuff went up.
Yep. Stuff went up. This is part of why they didn't get much in the way of changes for rules, because they're just trying to balance them with points. I don't think there's anything wrong with any of this stuff. There's some of it that I'm not excited about, but for the most part, I don't know that I have any complaints. It's one of those things that's like, no, they were really good. And when they have one of the most consistent rules in the game of just, but I decided I rolled this today.
Well,
it's hard to argue against kind of some of these being more expensive.
To me, it's like an Imperium faction with a little bit of Eldar style in there.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. How about the Custodes?
Custodes buffed across the board, period. So not only do you have these units that got cheaper, but as a reminder, they're basically one of their core detachments changed to where they now get Feel No Pains against dev wounds, which is one of the ways that was the real answer to them. So while not every detachment is arguably better, enough of them are better that between the units and their core rules, I think they net got buffed.
Also note they still have their Forge World stuff.
Correct.
Just so everyone.
And even some of that is what's getting cheaper.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. AdMech.
AdMech. They went up in points in a bunch of places.
But a lot of things also got a lot more attacks, so it's kind of hard to say.
For the most part, it's totally fine. This is one of the factions where I'm going to complain about Pivot, because with the matched play rules specifically, when you take your troop unit that has the sniper rifle, your whole unit now loses 2 inches because you pivoted the sniper rifle guy.
Oh my gosh.
You're right. Again, so this is an example of this whole update, in my opinion, just to recap. They had the right idea. Every rules change they made, I'd argue, is in the right direction. But they had to go 1 or 2 steps that direction in order to find the balance that we're looking for. I don't know if it was 1 or 2, but that it was 1 or 2. They decided to go 3 and 4 for no reason. And while we went in the right direction, we're going to end up with other problems now. So we've traded one problem for another.
Eldari kind of got... It's a little mixed. A lot of the Voidweaver, Viper, and a handful of characters got cheaper. Most of them stayed the same. And then Dark Reapers, Skyweavers, Warp Spiders, Fire Dragons, Swooping Hawks, and Yvrain got more expensive. Oh, Wraithlord got cheaper.
Yep. So for the most part, what I'm going to say here is named characters got cheaper, with the exception of Yvrain. And their staple units that you were seeing in most lists, Warp Spiders, Dark Reapers, Swooping Hawks, Fire Dragons, they all got more expensive. So Eldar are in an actually interesting place, and I say that because if I looked at all the points changes across like the last 3 point changes, I would argue for the most part that they were trying to encourage infantry and they were trying to discourage playing a ton of characters.
Right.
This goes exactly against that. They're encouraging playing the named characters. They're discouraging playing such cheap infantry units. I think a lot of that has to do with, even though Eldar have been nerfed many times this edition, they're still in a very reasonable place. And I think that's why this is happening. We've seen in the tournament scene, we've seen a lot of people go away from them just because they're not like the auto win they used to be. So even though the numbers of players have gone to a reasonable level, the players that are still playing it are still doing just fine because the codex, or I should say the index, is still in a reasonable place. They're not actually bad. They're just more reasonable now.
Yeah, okay. And then let's see here. We got Agents of the Imperium.
No changes, which I think is a mistake.
I'm pretty sure we're going to get a big update. There's a lot of suspicion. Stuff's getting taken off the website. They're probably going to have a new book. And
I'm all on board for that.
But
the
for
only
now,
thing I can say,
we're stuck. This is what it is.
And with all the changes, I think I'm not... Knowing that the codex is coming out, we have a really brief window of I think they did it wrong, but it's a brief window, so thus I'm not actually upset about it. The only thing I'm going to say is that the Calidus directly got debuffed due to the Vect ability. You now have to decide between an ability. Do you want to have Vect, or do you want to have Lone Op? She's basically the only assassin that's giving up Lone Op most of the game.
Right.
And she didn't go down in points. I'm not upset that she got that Vect ability. I'm totally fine with it. I think the Vect ability change is actually great. But also, when you directly debuff a unit, you probably should have reduced it in points by something. Even if it was 10 points, and whether that's enough or not, I would have at least appreciated the acknowledgement of, we made this model worse. And it stayed the same.
Yeah,
the rest of it is all reasonable. I would like to see some changes, but that's like an opinion.
All right.
So
Astra Militarum, they got some points drops. Not a ton.
So some of the points drops, like the Mana Core, the Death Strike, Field Ordnance, that has to do with the debuff to the indirect fire. So the fact that they went down in points, like the Basilisk is now 140, that's better, but also we're going to argue equally as efficient, because while it got cheaper, it's also hitting less. So, aw shucks.
Yeah, but the Dorn got cheaper. That's
the Dorn got way cheaper. Armored Sentinels got way cheaper, and for that, this is part of why I say I don't think Guard is the Horde faction for the Imperium right now, because I don't know. There are
more
people
tanks
who were playing triple Dorn before, but there was an argument between Dorns and Russes. Now that the points get reduced, almost everyone who is like the Guard players that were discussing amongst themselves of do you take a Russ plus a thing, or do you take an extra Dorn? Now
it's gonna be
all
Dorn.
Of them are agreeing more Dorn.
Oh, she went to Dorn. Yeah, they chose the Dorn.
Yep.
Black Templars, not a lot.
No, it's they got point increases on their unique variants. The fact that it wasn't the Lancer means that I think they were doing this just because they wanted Gladiators to be the same price.
Yeah,
I don't actually know that this was needed.
I don't know. I've rarely seen them. I'm not sure it matters. Blood Angels, no changes. Even though they had that little bit of detachment change, but...
Yep, there's a little bit of attachment change, but for the most part, they're getting they're seeing most of their changes in the core Space Marines, not in themselves, their unique units.
So on top of the shadow of the warp getting clarified or expanded or whatever, Chaos Demons had a lot of points drops.
Correct. Demons. So demons did get arguably a nerf here in that the action changes have definitely kind of put a squeeze on them because they were playing like the big monsters. Nurglings can no longer do actions, which they were splashing in for action monkeys. But now that they've gotten those nerfs, they are still objectively better. They're way more killy because they have the better ability, because they have a bunch of auras. Not all, but many of their monsters got much cheaper. They're in a significantly better place than they were, despite getting some nerfs.
It's probably a lot easier to squeeze in that Demon Prince with the wings now. Just saying. Chaos Knights, similar drops on some of the big knights.
And there's the buffs because they are some of the Titanic characters, so they're gonna also... we're going to call that net zero, but they got some buffs too. They can do actions more efficiently, but there's more actions required in the game. So we'll see where they end up.
Chaos Space Marines went up on a lot of their popular units. However, I think they're still going to be doing just fine because they have so many action monkey type units.
They're a lot like core Space Marines. In that they have such a vast array of units to choose from. Even if they overpointed something here, there's so many options in the codex that but we can just swap it out for this other thing, and that's okay.
Yeah, Dark Angels are
really hurting.
Are just fine. Deathwing Knights went up a little bit, and Ravenwing Darkshroud went up a little bit. And that's it. Oh, they forgot to make its text red. Whatever. It's fine.
No complaints. They're two of their best units. It seems fine.
Death Guard, the Biologus Putrefier and the Foul Blightspawn went up. It's funny because they made a clarification on the Biologus grenade thing. So I don't know if that's a double nerf or not. Well, it's hard to tell.
No. So it's actually a buff because remember everyone else got a nerf to free stratagems.
Oh, okay.
But the free stratagems still apply if they specifically call out this specific stratagem. Then it's still free.
Well, they specifically make it say it's 0 CP.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So that's...
He technically got a buff.
Blightlord,
because of that.
Blightlord Terminators got cheaper too. That'll be fun.
Yep, and again, this kind of goes along with
Deathwatch dropped points.
Yep, which is crazy.
The veterans are cheaper. Oh, good.
Well, veterans are cheaper because now there's this new mission pack cares more about battle line, cares more about actions, so their battle line unit got cheaper. They also, with the change to the Vect ability, their Watchmaster got cheaper and better. Deathwatch got definitely put into a better spot.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what goes on there. Drukhari. Scourges got more expensive when there's 5 and cheaper when there's 10.
Yep, and that's because I believe that's one of their 0 OC units. They can no longer do actions. So taking a cheap unit they made more expensive to double nerf them, because again, we take 3 steps or 4 steps to fix something that only required 2. But they made the max unit cheaper because it can't do an action. So when you actually go to take them for what GW is saying the intended purpose is of just kill things, now we made it cheaper because we want you to still buy them or take them in your list.
Yeah, Gene Stealers, it's all over the place. They've had a lot of update.
Yes, and
some things, the vehicles got cheaper. Some of the Gene Stealers got cheaper. A couple characters.
Every character got more expensive.
Except for Locus and Magus, but I don't think people were bringing them very much.
Yeah, but almost every character got more expensive.
The Atlan
units got cheaper.
The Atlan Jackals got more expensive, and they got nerfed from the pivot rules. Mick, ouch. Whatever. Even the character.
Again, arguably they got a minor buff in that they didn't change, so they still get to bring multiple units back. And the fact that they made the characters more expensive and the units cheaper only encourages people to do that more.
Yeah, Grey Knights went up. The Dread Knights are more expensive, both character and not.
Mm-hmm. Castellan Crow went up, which is significant. He was seeing a lot of play. The changes to the Land Raiders and Storm Ravens are kind of just to keep them in line with regular Space Marines. I don't actually know that these changes are relevant to Grey Knights. It's not that they wouldn't take them. They were willing to take Land Raiders, but I think the points changes has to do with they were playtesting or deciding on Space Marines. And when someone asked about, like, what about the Grey Knight version? People just said, we already made a decision, go with it. Imperial
Knights got cheaper for some of the big knights, especially the Forge World ones. The Votan, no changes. I know you love that.
Yeah, they're honestly, they're just underplayed. Like, I think they're actually way better than people give them credit for. I still think they need a nerf in that they should only get 3 judgments at the beginning of the game instead of 4. But because they're such a small player base, they're kind of flying under the radar.
Necrons, you got the Canoptic Doomstalker and Canoptic Wraiths going up, and that's about it.
Yep. And that is them trying to nerf a specific tournament list from the Canoptic Court without necessarily
nerfing everything else.
Like nerfing Necrons as a whole.
Wow. Okay. Orcs, Mega Noms went up, so that's kind of a double nerf.
Yep.
Boss Snickrot went up a little bit. I don't really know why. Weird Boy went up. That's fair. He's already so cheap. It's hard to argue with that. It's probably the boys mob.
Yeah, the Green Tide.
Because getting your, like, up to 3 redeploys with Weird Boys attached, that's big. When you're also saying we all have invols and we're going to stand in front of you.
Yep.
Pain Boy and Pain Boss went up. That was mostly because they were being used in conjunction with the boys.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a nerf to the Horde, not necessarily the Bully Boys.
Correct. Yeah, so Weird Boy, Pain Boss, Pain Boy, I think that all has to do with the Green Tide for the most part. Mega Knobs getting double nerfed is to try to specifically bring down the Bully Boys detachment. Boss Snickrot is the only one that I think was a change that was made to orcs as a whole, and not, but we want to slow down a specific detachment.
All right, we got Chaosium Space Marines. I mean, Codex Space Marines. They're totally loyal. I didn't say that.
Yep. And again, so as you
Gladiators, Land Raider, it's kind of across the board. Same stuff.
Yep.
Repulsors got cheaper. What are they? Oh my gosh.
It was double buff though, remember? Because they got cheaper and every other vehicle slowed down. They don't slow down.
Also, the Iron Storm enhancements got cheaper.
They got cheaper, but that's because they got converted to auras. So they're
more restrictive. I understand.
Correct. So that's just to keep them kind of in balance.
Hey, your Thunderwolf Cavalry and Wolfen got more expensive.
Yep, and the argument for Thundercav getting more expensive is reasonable.
You got a round base. You're fine.
Yeah, but it's totally fine. I'm not complaining about the Thunderwolves going up. The Wolfen, they got double nerfed because not only did they go up in points, even though I think they were kind of rough to play. But if you're good with them, maybe you could make them work. But now they're OC0, which means in addition to not doing or holding objectives, they can no longer do actions. So they got double nerfed, which I think is a bit much. If they just would have prevented the actions, that probably would have been enough of a nerf.
So you gotta kill is what you're saying. That's your only option.
That's the only option.
Tau got commanders, crisis suits, broadsides. Strike team's cheaper, but Hammerhead went up. The Kroot are staying pretty much the same in there. But I think they just got an update, I believe, before this.
Mm-hmm. And for the most part, all they're trying to do here is to encourage infantry and reduce the number of tanks on the field, which you could argue they're doing in several different factions. But
yeah, well, we are seeing 3 dials being turned at the same time.
Yep.
1,000 Suns, some things got cheaper.
Yep. And again, with the change to some of their Cabal rules as far as how their sorcery points work, they, like, arguably there was a nerf to those, but some of their stuff got cheaper. I still think the Vortex Beasts are the unsung hero of this whole codex. I think they're still in a good spot.
Tyranids, Neurolictors went up. It's fair. Biovores and Mugalid Spores went down.
Because they got nerfed. So Biovores were taken as action monkeys because they would shoot out a Spore Mine. The Spore Mine would do an action, but that Spore Mine is OC0, so they can no longer do actions. So they're reducing them because they're taking these things that were supposed to do actions and forcing them into being damage only.
And then Ripper Swarms ended up in a weird spot. That's fun.
Because, again, OC0, so people used to take one to do cheap actions and, like, strategic reserves do an action. Now, taking one is more expensive, but taking the max 3, I don't know why you would, is cheaper. So if you just take them for damage dealing for some reason, because I guess you play against a lot of orcs, and if they fought Grots, that would be reasonable.
Oh, Grots versus Ripper. That's fun.
But if you're not playing into a bunch of
World Eaters, the
toughness things.
The 8-bound and Exalted 8-bound went down in points. Do you think, are they OC0? They're not.
They are not. Nope. This was just a direct buff.
They have a small number of units, so I can see why. They're their mainline kind of infantry. It should be Berserkers, but it's not. The Berserkers, well, I don't know.
Well, so the argument is it's a different play style. The 8-bound were all the rage for a while. They went up in points, and then they kind of died off. It's kind of like the Eldar situation, where they were popular and doing so good that by the time GW got around to nerfing them, they overtuned them or over-nerfed them, and people died off because it wasn't as easy. So only like the real kind of dedicated players were still playing it.
Yeah, stay committed to your faction.
Correct. And then now that that's happened, there's so few World Eater players that they're like, oh, I realized that I overcorrected, and they're trying to make minor adjustments backwards in order to find where the balance is.
Yeah. Oh, that's the last one. All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. This has been a fun hour and 40 minutes. Chris has to go get food somehow.
Yep, I gotta go into the shop here in a bit, but yeah, we'll keep doing videos as stuff comes out. I know there's other things.
Yeah, we're gonna be at Gen Con and at Nova, so come see us there if you guys are gonna be around. Thanks for watching.